The pulsating hum of the Junkkeeper's engines was a familiar lullaby to Kale. It wasn't the pristine, silent thrum of the great starships of the galactic empires, but a rough, grinding chord of repurposed steel and jury-rigged wiring. Kale, a human with grease-stained hands and a mind that saw not just parts, but possibilities, stood on the command deck. Outside the viewport, an armada of sleek, chrome-plated vessels passed them by, their elegant forms gliding through the void like polished jewels. They were the proud fleets of the Ascendancy and the Corvian Concord, and they saw Kale's ship, the Junkkeeper, as a rusting disgrace. Humanity was a newcomer to the galactic stage. We didn't arrive with grand fleets of warp-capable battleships or planet-crushing superweapons. We came in salvaged vessels, patched together with scrap metal and alien tech we barely understood. The older races, with their millennia of technological advancement, looked at us with a mixture of pity and contempt. They had perfect, single-purpose ships. A fighter was only a fighter, a carrier only a carrier. But for us, a ship was what we made it. The Junkkeeper was living proof of that, a glorified garbage scow with a heart of 100 different engines, a vessel built not by engineers with blueprints, but by scrappers with intuition. Our first contact with the galactic community was underwhelming. We were granted a small, non-strategic sector of the galaxy to settle, a cosmic backwater, and were mostly ignored. The few times we interacted with the major powers, it was to barter for their refuse, the discarded hulls of old freighters, the broken plasma conduits from decommissioned research stations. This earned us the unfortunate nickname of the Scavengers. Kale, however, saw it as a badge of honor. To him, the broken pieces were a language, a series of whispers telling him what they could become. He could look at a shattered Corvian shield emitter and see its core logic, figuring out how to reconfigure it for an entirely different purpose. He saw things the original creators, with their rigid, single-minded design philosophies, never could. But then, the enemy arrived. The car. They came from the deepest, darkest reaches of the cosmos, their ships angular and black, with no visible engines or lights. They simply appeared, silent and deadly, striking with a swiftness that defied all known military doctrine. Their ships weren't just fast, they were adaptable, their weapons and defenses seemingly changing on the fly to counter whatever the Ascendancy or the Corvian fleets threw at them. The ancient empires, for all their power, were being systematically dismantled. Their pristine, specialized ships, built for specific roles, were simply outmatched by a foe that could change its tactics in the middle of a firefight. A desperate plea for reinforcements was sent out. The call reached the human sector, and we responded. Not with a unified, impressive fleet, but with every ship we could muster. Farmers piloting converted hauling ships, prospectors in rugged rockhoppers, and, of course, a few specialized scavenger vessels like Kale's. We arrived at the central command hub to a chorus of barely concealed ridicule. We were given a menial task: patrol the outer, insignificant fringes of the battle zone and perform search and rescue for any survivors. The main fleets of the Ascendancy and the Corvian Concord, with their powerful energy weapons and hyper-advanced shields, would handle the real fighting. The battle began, and it was a slaughter. From the Junkkeeper's bridge, Kale watched in horror as the Ascendancy's vanguard, a fleet of magnificent battleships, was torn apart. The car ships, small but agile, swarmed them. The Ascendancy battleships fired their main cannons, but the car's shields flickered, absorbing the energy and then shifting frequency, rendering the next volley useless. The car then retaliated with a strange, twisting energy that bypassed the Ascendancy's shields entirely, shearing through their hulls. The Corvians fared no better. Their defense-in-depth strategy, once considered flawless, was shattered by the car's ability to teleport their smaller vessels directly into the Corvian formation, causing absolute chaos. The radio chatter filled with panicked shouts, then silence. The car weren't just winning, they were dominating. They were adaptable, and the old empires, with their rigid tactics and perfect, yet single-purpose, technology, couldn't adapt quickly enough. Kale's mind was racing, a whirlwind of observation and analysis. He saw what the polished engineers of the other races could not. Their ships were works of art, but they were also brittle. They were designed to do one thing, and do it perfectly. When faced with an enemy that broke all the rules, they had no contingency, no backup plan. "They're too specialized," Kale muttered to his second-in-command, a wiry woman named Alara with a knack for spotting a viable part from a mile away. "Their weapons are powerful, but they have a single frequency. Their shields are strong, but they can't change their resonance fast enough. They built perfect tools, but they can't build a wrench that can also be a hammer." Suddenly, a crazy idea took root in his mind. An idea so illogical, so completely against all known galactic engineering principles, that it might just work. He ordered the Junkkeeper to move closer to the wreckage of the battle, ignoring the frantic warnings on the comms. The void was littered with the debris of the most advanced ships in the galaxy, shattered hulls, broken power cores, and twisted weapon systems. To the other races, it was just garbage. To Kale, it was a goldmine. He made a desperate comms call to the remaining fleet commander, a stern-faced Corvian general named Xylos. Xylos, his fleet reduced to a handful of battered vessels, was initially furious. "Human, what are you doing? This is a graveyard. Retreat at once." Xylos's voice crackled with rage and despair. "General," Kale replied, his voice calm but firm. "Your technology is failing. You are losing because your ships are too perfect. They can't adapt. But we can. Give us the resources. Give us the salvage." Xylos was silent for a long moment. He was a proud warrior, and the thought of relying on a human scavenger was a deep humiliation. But he looked at the wreckage of his once invincible fleet and then at the screen showing the TH car advancing relentlessly. He had nothing left to lose. "Take what you need, Scavenger," he finally conceded, the word holding a new, bitter weight. "But be quick. We won't last much longer." Kale didn't need to be told twice. He and his crew worked feverishly, a chaotic ballet of desperation and genius. They weren't building a ship, they were building a weapon. They used the Junkkeeper's massive salvage bays as their workshop. Kale and Alara directed the effort, shouting orders as robotic arms and magnetic grapples pulled in wreckage. A broken ascendancy plasma cannon was torn from its mount. Kale saw its power core, still half-functional. He decided to reroute its energy output, not to fire a bolt, but to power a different system. A Corvian shield emitter, twisted and useless for defense, had its internal dampeners stripped out. Kale had a wild theory that he could reconfigure its energy field to destabilize molecular bonds, not to protect, but to dissolve. They found components from a dozen different species, pieces that were never meant to fit together. The workshop was a mess of sparking wires, buzzing energy fields, and the clang of metal on metal. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning circuits. The human crew worked without a break, fueled by stale coffee and a fierce determination. Their methods were messy, their calculations were rough, but they were driven by a single purpose: to build something that was ugly, unorthodox, and unpredictable. The alien forces, watching them on a remote feed, were baffled. They saw only chaos and a monumental waste of time. They couldn't understand that this was exactly how humanity thrived: by improvising, by making something out of nothing, by refusing to admit defeat. Kale called the device the Junkkeeper's Mark. It was a Frankenstein's monster of technology, a cobbled-together monstrosity of exposed wires, clashing metal plates, and glowing, unstable energy conduits. It had no aesthetic appeal, no elegant curves, no polished surfaces. It looked like the result of a fever dream. But it was ready. Just in time. The final, decisive assault began. The TH car came with a force so large it blotted out the distant stars. The remaining Allied fleets were a pitiful sight, barely holding a line against the onslaught. Xylos, the Corvian general, braced himself for the end. He watched as the human ship, the ugly Junkkeeper, moved into position at the center of the defensive line. "General Xylos, activate our shields." Kale's voice cut through the comms. "It's a useless gesture, Scavenger. They'll bypass them in a second." Xylos shouted back, frustration, and despair in his voice. "Just do it," Kale commanded. Xylos, for reasons he could not fully comprehend, obeyed. The Corvian fleet's shields shimmered to life. The Th-Car ships came at them, their weapons ready. Then, Kale activated the Junk Heaper's mark. It didn't fire a beam or launch a missile. Instead, a wave of chaotic, multicolored energy burst from the device. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a disruptor, a chaos generator. The energy wave was a symphony of discordant frequencies, a digital scream that overwhelmed the Th-Car's highly specific and rigid systems. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Th-Car's adaptive shields, which relied on quickly changing to match a specific incoming frequency, were hit with a million different frequencies at once. They buckled, flickered, and then failed spectacularly, leaving the enemy ships exposed. Their sleek, invisible engines flared and died as the chaotic energy interfered with their power conduits. The Th-Car fleet, so accustomed to perfection and flawless execution, was thrown into complete disarray. Their command and control broke down. Their ships began to collide with one another. "Now, General Xylos, fire everything you have." Kale's voice was filled with a triumphant fury. Xylos, stunned but quick to react, gave the command. The remaining Allied ships fired their full arsenals into the now helpless Th-Car fleet. They were like fish in a barrel. The silent, terrifying invaders were suddenly just targets, their perfect technology rendered useless by a single, ugly, improvised device. The battle raged for hours, but the momentum had shifted. The Th-Car, confused and unable to adapt to this new, chaotic enemy, began to retreat. Their retreat was not the disciplined, strategic maneuver of a professional military. It was a desperate scramble for survival. The galactic empires, battered but victorious, had been saved. The aftermath was a turning point for humanity. The Ascendancy, the Corvians, and all the other major powers were left in a state of shock. They had been on the verge of annihilation, and they had been saved not by their perfect technology, but by the very scrappers they had so scorned. General Xylos, standing on his command deck, watched the Junk Heaper float triumphantly in the middle of the wreckage. He finally understood. Humanity wasn't a primitive species. They were something else entirely. Their technological prowess wasn't in creating perfect, specialized machines, but in their ability to adapt and improvise, to find a solution to a problem that no one else had even considered. Kale and his crew, covered in grease and exhausted to the bone, were hailed as heroes. The Junk Heaper's mark was studied and analyzed by the brightest minds in the galaxy, but they couldn't replicate it. Its design was not based on theory or a perfect blueprint. It was based on an instinct, on an almost artistic ability to make disparate parts work together. It was a masterpiece of imperfection. From that day forward, humanity's place in the galaxy was secured. They were no longer the scavengers. They were the fixers, the problem solvers, the ones you went to when the perfect, elegant solutions of the old ways failed. They were respected not for their power, but for their ingenuity. And Kale, the humble engineer with grease on his hands, had become a legend, a living testament to the fact that in the face of the unknown, it's not the biggest gun or the smartest machine that wins the day. It's the human spirit, the messy, beautiful, and utterly brilliant ability to build a wrench that can also be a hammer.